Today I'm going to be talking about language analysis for GCSE English language, aimed really at students that want to get a grade 4 or above and what to avoid really in order to get that grade 4 or above. And I'm going to be using Christopher Isherwood's novel A Single Man for this video, which is a novel that I read recently which I really love, and there was an interesting extract at the end of it which I thought, oh, I'll use that as a question for language analysis practice. So this is the extract and this is the question. How does the writer use language to describe George's experience of swimming? So we have a character here called George who has gone swimming in the sea. And this piece of description is about conveying that to us. And you can see the first step here is, this is what it would look like, kind of like this on the page, blank, and you've got to take your highlighter or your pen and start to annotate the extract. So in this case, the question is, which words would you choose in order to think about how the writer conveys swimming? So it says, and now suddenly here is a great and apocalyptically great wave, and George is way out, almost out of his depth, standing naked and tiny before its presence, under the lip of its roaring upheaval and the towering menace of its fall. He tries to dive through it. Even now he feels no real fear, but instead he is caught and picked up, turned over and over and over, flapping and kicking toward a surface, which may be either up or down or sideways. He no longer knows. So at this point you can pause the video and highlight or write down words that you would want to use in terms of answering this question, or you can carry on watching and we can start to think about kind of labeling some of these words and features. So here we have a selection of phrases and words which I think are quite interesting when we're thinking about how the writer conveys swimming or George's experience of swimming to us as readers. Out of these words, the next step is to think about, well, what devices, what techniques, what word classes can you see? So again, you might want to pause the video now and label some of these and see if you can use any of your language techniques in order to embed those in your analysis a bit later. And here we have the names of those techniques. You can see we've got a selection here of devices such as repetition and a list, but the majority of these words are more word classes, so adjectives, adverbs, nouns and verbs. You'll notice that I've deliberately color-coded them to kind of link together, because you might also be thinking about semantic fields or patterns of language or patterns of words, which is a skill that higher level students will use in order to boost their marks. So if you want to get the higher marks, it's always a good idea to look for patterns or trends or similarities or semantic fields in the language, which are all coming together to reinforce the same idea. So here I've put in blue all words which are to do perhaps with size and volume. And in kind of that dark green colour, I've also put in verbs which are quite violent in nature, in connotation. So again, you might want to group words together like that. There's probably too many words here to use actually in 10 minutes. There's probably too many, but you'll be using a selection of these in your answer. So the most important thing with language analysis is not actually feature spotting like this, although it helps to get some marks. It's actually your development of the ideas of the effects of the words. So in other words, why has the writer used these words? What do those words or phrases make you as the reader think, feel or imagine? And when you're thinking about thinking or feeling or imagining something, it means that you're talking about impacts or the effects of language. And that's why language is there. It's to manipulate our feelings, our emotions, to create some kind of impact. So if we wanted to elaborate much more, we could talk about these kind of things. I'm not going to go through all of these because obviously you can pause the video or you can just read them as I'm speaking. But underneath each of these techniques, I've included some of the ideas that you might want to include in your analysis of that particular word or phrase. And you can see it's very much like a brain dump. I'm literally just listing all of the ideas that come to mind, because what I would want to do when I would write this paragraph in terms of my language response is I'd want to kind of glue all of this together in full sentences in order to create that that kind of an elaboration and be able to analyze using some of these ideas. Post-it notes tend to work quite well for language analysis. Just getting, or even bullet points, just getting ideas down in any form with the idea of then kind of using those ideas to kind of stick them all together in longer sentences. So before I show you a couple of examples, I just want to remind you that with language analysis, because we are dealing here with an analytical skill, these kinds of words are quite useful. I just call them analysis words, strangely. They're all very good because these are the kind of words that students will use when they're talking about the effect of something. So what you would do is you would use one of these words between stating the technique and the evidence and then giving your own interpretation. So I've got two examples there. The writer uses the adjective towering, which conveys, or the writer presents the whatever through the verbs flapping and kicking, which emphasizes. So you can see that both of those words in bold I've taken from this grid, showing much more confident way to comment on the effects of language choice. So I would also encourage students to revise some of these words to use in your analytical questions, mainly questions 2, 3, and 4 for paper 1, and questions 3 and 4, and also probably question 2 as well for paper 2. So use them, they're quite useful. So here is an example of a grades 1 to 3 answer. So not a national pass for GCSE, but still a grade, but not quite reaching the grade 4 plus standard, which is what you need, of course, to get your GCSE. So this student says the writer uses language to make the writing interesting and it makes the reader want to read on. In the extract, the writer uses language because it's very interesting. So they've kind of repeated themselves there. The writer says, and now suddenly here is a great and apocalyptically great wave, and George is way out, almost out of his depth, standing naked and tiny before its presence under the lip of its roaring upheaval and the towering menace of its fall. This is interesting and to read and creates imagery. So as you might kind of understand as I'm reading that, there are things that aren't quite developed enough in order to get a confident pass here. So the first thing is that they repeat the same point. They don't really get past the idea of it being interesting. But what they don't say is interesting why. Why is it interesting? Another problem with this is that the quote is far too long. The reference to the text is almost 4 lines, half this paragraph. And while you're copying the text, you're not actually getting any marks because it's not your work. It's how you use that reference that gets you marks, not just simply copying large chunks of text out. So what you will find is the less confident student will just quote long quotes rather than actually discuss the evidence in their own words. So it might be a good quote to use, but we just need to shorten it down. Maybe no more than 5 words. Some teachers are very strict and they say, I don't want to see a quote that's longer than 5 words because it gets students to focus more on the analysis of the wording rather than the kind of the quote itself. So the second issue is that the quote is too long. And the third issue could be there's no devices, there's no techniques. But another issue could be the fact that when at the bottom it says it creates imagery, again, creates imagery about what? What are we seeing here? So it's just like a throwaway comment. So because this has a lack of confidence in terms of how to analyze specifically language, it means that this student would probably not get the grade 4 if they were to write like this in the exam. So an example of a more successful answer in terms of if students wanted to get a grade above a 4 would be something along the lines of this. The writer presents George's swim as dangerous with potentially fatal consequences because of the rough conditions. So immediately they've understood what is being described here. For example, the writer uses the adverb apocalyptically, which reinforces how the rough waves are potentially dangerous to George. So we've got much shorter quotes, much more judicious, much more selective, and also we've got a technique there, adverb. The writer continues to contrast the energy of the large waves with George's smallness and vulnerability. The repetition of the adjective great alongside the adjective towering suggests height and power, whereas the adjectives naked and tiny foreground George's powerlessness. This makes me feel as if the ocean is toying with George, as if he is prey and the sea is the predator. This links to the noun menace, which has connotations of attacking, bullying behaviour. The fact that the writer uses lots of verbs to depict George's panicky swimming, such as flapping and kicking, suggests he is trying desperately to survive, as he is being thrown in all directions by the strong current and is at risk of drowning. Much more confident, much more precise reference to the text. They've got their techniques in there as well, but clearly they're not just feature spotting. They're using those techniques to enhance their interpretation. And they've really thought about, in their own words, the effects of this language choice and just really what the writer is trying to convey and the scene that the writer is trying to convey. So you can imagine here seeing a swimmer in a rough sea kind of flailing around and being toyed with these very large waves. Not a very pleasant situation to be in either, I can imagine. So that is an example of a more successful response in terms of analysing a writer's choice of language. Okay, so hopefully that was useful. GCSE English language analysis, what to do in order to try and get higher than a grade 4 or to get a grade 4 or above. Thanks for watching and good luck in your studies.